The sun was setting gently over the small countryside town, its last rays spilling through the kitchen window of Diep's new house. The faint scent of lemongrass and ginger drifted in the air, blending with the sound of laughter that echoed softly from the living room. After months of struggle, sickness, and endless nights of worry, this was the evening that marked a new beginning, a housewarming dinner for 4. Diep stood in the kitchen, her sleeves rolled up, hair tied back, moving gracefully between the stove and the counter. Every motion carried both exhaustion and quiet joy. On the table lay a few simple yet heartfelt dishes: steamed chicken with lime leaves, a bowl of sweet and sour soup, stir-fried vegetables, and a plate of fresh spring rolls. She wasn't a chef, but tonight every dish seemed to hold a piece of her journey, the pain, the hope, and the gratitude that had built her new home. From the doorway, James leaned against the frame, watching her silently. His usually calm face softened with a smile that reached his eyes. "Need a hand?" he asked in his warm voice. Diep turned, a playful sparkle in her gaze. "You'll just taste everything before dinner, won't you?" James chuckled, pretending to be offended. "I was only making sure it's safe for everyone," he said, stepping closer. The sound of their laughter filled the space, light and tender, as if the walls themselves were breathing in happiness for the first time. From the living room, the cheerful voice of baby Nee rang out. "Mommy, Grandma said the rice is ready. Can we eat now?" Diep's heart melted instantly. She wiped her hands and called back. "Just a few more minutes, sweetheart. Tell Grandma to set the bowls." Mother Lan, James's mother, smiled kindly as she placed the chopsticks and bowls on the wooden table. Her hands trembled slightly from age, but her heart was full. She had watched this young woman endure storms and rebuild her life piece by piece. Tonight, as the aromas of home-cooked food wrapped around her, she felt at peace. When everything was ready, Diep looked around the small but bright house. The freshly painted walls, the small vase of wildflowers Nee had picked, the warm glow from the ceiling lamp. It wasn't luxurious, but it was theirs. Her heart swelled with gratitude. "All right," James said as he lifted Nee into her chair, "the first official dinner in this new house." He glanced at Diep and his mother, his voice softening. "A home built not from bricks, but from love." They all joined their hands briefly before the meal, a silent prayer of thanks. The clinking of chopsticks soon followed, mixed with laughter and small stories. Nee tried to feed her grandmother, who laughed until tears sparkled in her eyes. James occasionally sneaked glances at Diep, his heart swelling at the sight of her smiling again after so long. For the first time in months, Diep felt a calm she hadn't known she'd missed. The world outside could still be stormy, uncertain, but in this moment, surrounded by the 3 people she loved most, she realized that happiness didn't always roar. Sometimes, it whispered softly at the dinner table, wrapped in the scent of steamed rice and love. And as the night deepened, the new house stood quietly under the silver light of the moon, a witness to a fresh beginning, a fragile yet unbreakable happiness. The dinner table glowed under the soft yellow light. The sound of chopsticks touching bowls mingled with Nee's cheerful giggles. It wasn't just a meal, it was a reunion of hearts, bound together by everything they had overcome. James watched Diep serve food to his mother, her hands gentle and full of care. "Mom, try this," Diep said softly, placing a piece of chicken into her bowl. "It's your favorite recipe. I followed exactly what you taught me." Mother Lan smiled, her eyes misting with both pride and tenderness. "It tastes even better when you make it, child. Maybe it's because now you're cooking with love." She reached across the table, lightly patting Diep's hand. James's gaze softened. For years, his mother had lived alone after his father passed away, holding onto old memories like fading photographs. Now, to see her laugh again, to see warmth return to her eyes, it was something he hadn't dared to dream of. Meanwhile, Nee sat beside her grandmother, struggling to use her chopsticks. "Daddy, it's too slippery," she cried, pouting as a piece of vegetable fell back into her bowl. James chuckled, moving closer to help. "Here, let Daddy show you." He gently guided her tiny hands, patient and kind. Diep paused, watching the scene, her heart swelling at how naturally he had become both protector and father. The rain that had fallen earlier in the day was gone now. replaced by the calm song of crickets outside the window. Through the open curtain, a soft breeze carried the scent of night flowers into the room. The world outside felt peaceful, and so did their hearts. Motherland broke the silence with a nostalgic sigh. You know, when I first moved into my house with your father, we didn't even have a proper table. We used a stack of old boxes, but every meal felt full, not because of what we ate, but because of who we ate with. Her words lingered, wrapping the room in a gentle hush. Diep glanced at James, her eyes shimmering. Maybe that's what love really is, she whispered. Not about how big the house is or how much food we have, but sitting together and knowing we belong. James reached for her hand under the table, giving it a quiet squeeze. Exactly. We've already been through storms, but now, this. He looked around, smiling softly. This is what I fought for. Nee looked at them both, curious and innocent. Daddy, are you crying? She asked, noticing the faint glimmer in his eyes. He laughed through the emotion. Maybe just a little. Because Daddy's happy. Diep smiled, leaning closer to wipe a stray tear from his cheek. Then let's make sure these tears are the last sad ones, she said tenderly. The house was filled again with laughter, real, unforced, and whole. Each smile carried the memory of pain transformed into peace. And as the candles flickered gently in the corner, the family of four shared their meal in quiet joy, a small, perfect moment that felt like forever. The plates were nearly empty now, save for a few grains of rice and a half-eaten slice of roasted chicken that Nee was still playing with. The laughter had softened into contented sighs, that familiar quiet that follows a meal full of love. James leaned back slightly, glancing at everyone around the table. The sight was simple, yet it made something deep in his heart stir. Diep's face glowed softly in the candlelight, her eyes full of life again. Motherland was humming a tune she hadn't sung in years. Nee was busy feeding her stuffed rabbit a spoonful of soup, whispering, "Eat up, bunny, or you'll be hungry." It was peace, the kind that came not from wealth or success, but from belonging. Diep, James said gently, breaking the silence. "There's something I want to tell you." She looked up, a little curious, her lips still curved in a smile. "What is it?" He stood and reached into his pocket, pulling out a small folded paper. "It's the final approval. The company registration for DJ Agriculture is complete." Her eyes widened in disbelief. "Already? But how? I thought it would take days." James chuckled softly. "I made a few calls this morning. You've been through enough waiting, Diep. You deserve a head start." For a moment, Diep just stared at the paper in his hands, the symbol of everything she dreamed of. She thought of the long days she had worked in the sun, of the nights she stayed awake worrying about her future, and of the man who had stood by her side through all of it. Tears welled up in her eyes, and her voice trembled. "James, I don't even know what to say." "Say that you'll keep fighting," he whispered, handing it to her. "Because this is just the beginning. We're building something real. Not just a company, but a new life." Motherland smiled proudly. "He's right, my dear. You've both come a long way. This home, this company, they're not just places or papers. They're the proof that love can grow roots." Nee clapped her little hands excitedly. "So Mommy's a boss now." Everyone burst into laughter. Diep leaned over and kissed Nee's forehead. "Maybe a small boss," she teased, "but Mommy will work hard so you can be proud." James raised his glass of tea, lifting it high. "To the new company," he said warmly, "and to the family who made it possible." Motherland and Diep lifted their cups too, eyes glistening. "To the new beginning," they echoed. The clinking of cups sounded like music, soft, pure, full of promise. Outside, the night wind rustled through the trees, carrying with it the smell of rain and fresh soil. It was as if the earth itself was blessing their new chapter. Diep took a slow breath, looking around the little dining room. The house might not have been grand, but in that moment, it was more beautiful than any mansion. It was a place where wounds had turned into wisdom, and struggles had become stories. She turned to James and said quietly, "You know, every time I think I can't go on, somehow, you remind me that I can." James smiled, his voice low and full of affection. "That's because you've always been stronger than you think, Diep. I just help you see it." and under the golden light of their small home, they sat, not as two people trying to survive anymore, but as a family who had finally learned how to live. When the dishes had been washed and Nee had fallen asleep in Motherland's arms, the house grew quiet. The laughter of the evening still lingered like music in the air. James opened the door and stepped outside, breathing in the cool night breeze. The sky was clear, filled with 1,000 bright stars that glittered like scattered diamonds. Diep followed him out, her shawl loosely wrapped around her shoulders. The soft yellow light from the window spilled onto the porch, painting her face with warmth. For a moment, neither of them spoke. They just stood side by side, listening to the gentle hum of crickets and the distant sound of a motorcycle passing by the village road. James turned to her. "It's hard to believe, isn't it?" he said softly. "Just a year ago, we were both fighting to keep everything from falling apart. And now," Diep smiled faintly, her eyes tracing the outline of the moon. "Now we have a home, a dream, and a family. But you know what?" She looked at him with a teasing glint. "It still doesn't feel real sometimes." He laughed quietly. "Reality doesn't always come with noise. Sometimes it's just this." He gestured to the quiet house behind them, where Mother Lan and Nee slept peacefully. "The sound of peace." Diep nodded, her voice gentle. "You've given me more than peace, James. You've given me courage. To believe in myself, to start again." James reached for her hand. Their fingers intertwined naturally, like two puzzle pieces that had finally found their place. "And you," he whispered, "taught me what it means to fight not for success, but for love. You made me realize that real strength isn't about winning. It's about staying when it's easier to walk away." A silence settled between them again, but it wasn't empty. It was full of everything unspoken, everything they had endured. The faint scent of jasmine drifted from the garden. Diep rested her head on his shoulder. Closing her eyes, "Do you think it will always be this peaceful?" she murmured. James looked at the horizon, where the last trace of sunset had faded. "No," he said honestly. "There will be storms again. There always are. But this time, we won't face them alone." Diep smiled, her heart swelling at his words. "Then let's promise each other. No matter what happens, we'll hold on." James turned to face her fully, his eyes tender. "Always," he said. They stood like that for a long while, the night wrapping around them like a blanket. The stars above seemed to shimmer brighter, as if celebrating their promise. Inside the house, baby Nee stirred in her sleep and murmured softly, "Mom, Dad," her tiny voice blending perfectly with the rhythm of the night. Diep's eyes filled with quiet tears as she whispered, "She's dreaming happy dreams." James tightened his arms around her and looked toward the sky. "That's all I've ever wanted," he said, "for her, for us." The wind blew softly through the trees, carrying away the last echoes of the day. And under that vast, starlit sky, the story of James and Diep, two hearts once broken, continued, stronger than ever. As dawn's light touched the roof of their new home, James, Diep, and little Nee shared breakfast together, the first morning of their new life. The house smelled of warm bread and fresh flowers. Mother Lan hummed softly in the kitchen, her voice blending with the sound of laughter. James looked around, at Diep's smile, at Nee's small hands reaching for fruit, at the sunlight pouring through the window, and he finally understood. Happiness wasn't about wealth or success, or even victory. It was about these quiet mornings, built from patience, forgiveness, and love that never gave up. Diep met his gaze and smiled knowingly. They didn't need to say anything. Their hearts had already spoken. Love had won, not with miracles, but with daily kindness. Outside, the wind carried the scent of blooming flowers, and the world seemed to whisper back to them. Every ending can be a new beginning if love remains true.